Today on the podcast, I am joined by award-winning speaker, TEDx speaker, and author of her debut book, Hello Grace, Lydia Knorr. Both Lydia and I know what it's like to have life split into before and after. And for her, it was the sudden loss of her husband. For me, it was losing my cousin at a very young age and also my grandmother 10 years ago. But before we dive in, I want to say this conversation moved me in such an unexpected way because, as someone who has spent a lot of time talking about legacy, rewriting our stories, and finding power in those hardships, in those painful experiences, this one felt personal. Lydia really shares how her husband's passing was not just a loss, but this sacred invitation to return to herself. And so, whether you are in a midst of your own transition or just need a reminder that healing and joy can coexist, this episode is for you. So, let's dive in. When you go beyond the surface and into the depths of who you truly are, you will rise. Welcome to the podcast, Lydia. I am so excited to have you to dive into your new book, Hello Grace. I'd first love for you to kind of just share what was that moment for you when you were like, I want to write a book, or when this book landed?
Yeah, yeah. Great question. Because that moment that I wanted to write a book actually was 16 years ago. I just like, one day I'm going to write a book, and I had a working title for it. And it was just kitschy and funny. And it was this bit of dichotomy, it was kind of a play on words. And I thought, okay, I didn't know what the content was going to be, but I just felt like, yeah, I'm going to write a book. And then life happened, and more life happened, and more life happened, and more stories came to be. And I went, oh my gosh, like that book idea never left me. But it was like, I'm not going to be able to do this on my own. I know it. Even though I'm so disciplined on so many levels in my life, I just thought I need someone to hold my hand to do this, and I need it to be the right person. So, not unlike yourself, I've had the experience of writing in an anthology book where I was a contributing author, one of many, with a fantastic editor who's done many, or publisher rather, who's done many of these types of books. And that was a great experience. And so that got the fire under my seat a little bit more. This whole idea of like, I really want my own book, but I don't have it in me to do it by myself. Long story short, through a mutual connection that you and I have in our history of speaking, I met somebody who was a judge at a speaking competition that I spoke at, and she was a publisher. And from the moment I just connected into her sphere of energy, I'm like, this is the person I want to work with. And so we started working together about not even a year ago. I'm going to say 10 months ago. But I didn't have anything else going on. I made this my full-time job. So within 6 months, I just churned that book out, between sessions with her and her editors, and we put this book together, and it went into the hands of the copy editing team in January. And now on May 27th, next Tuesday, my book officially launches out to the world. Hello, Grace.
Yes. Oh, and I have to say, I love the color. I'm such a, or like the cover, I'm such a like minimalist lover. And so the way
Yeah,
it looks is so beautiful as well. It's done so beautifully. So huge congratulations. I mean,
thank
those
you.
that listen to this, writing, not everyone writes a book, and it is not an easy task. As you and I now going both through this process, it is not easy to put there's so many different phases I find of even just like the journey of writing a book. It's like you kind of go through your own little like shell phase where you actually have to write the content. And then there's like getting it into production, and then it's the launch and when it takes a life of its own. And sometimes it's like people think that that's where the journey ends, and it's like that is only the beginning
Yeah,
of the entire journey, because now it's taking a life of its own, and now it can become its own thing, and it's so beautiful. And I
yeah,
love that the anthology, the co-author, was an experience for you, because also running in our collective voices that I run with one of my dear friends, that's something that we experience time and time again, is women that come through this and they lights this fire in them, and they're like, I've always wanted to write. I love writing. I've always wanted to write this book. And then they kind of go through the process, and it's this little piece of the puzzle that says, okay, I know I can do this. I did this once, and now I'm ready to do it on my own. I find such a beautiful stepping stone for
It
people
is.
to go on that journey.
It really, really is. When I wrote in the anthology, you're writing one chapter, so you're trying to just encapsulate a whole story, like a whole kind of life story into 7 pages or 8 pages. And in this instance, I really didn't know how this was going to go. I knew I wanted it to be somewhat of a memoir, but also like sort of a hybrid memoir, self-help, personal growth, personal development type of book, because that's what I do when I'm out there speaking. I'm inspiring people, to heal through their traumas and through, transform their adversities into opportunities, to create meaning out of things, which has been my experience. And that's what I wanted the book to be. But there were so many stories that I could share to that end. And so working with a really strong team was paramount to getting to that end goal, because I really didn't know where to begin. And I'm sure you experienced the same thing. You sit down and you've written speeches and you've written in anthologies, and you've written your essays and you have your degrees in journalism or communications or whatever they are. But it's very overwhelming, because now you're just putting your life down on paper. And structurally, it's, how do I want to format this? There are other people to help you along the way, but how do I want this all to make sense? And it has to make sense to me, and it has to be good. And are my readers going to like it? Because I'm sure that's something we all ask ourselves time and again. Is anybody going to actually like this? So sitting down with people who really know what they're doing, for me, was invaluable, because they said, okay, this is your style of writing. This is how you tell stories. These are all the stories you want to share. We think this is how you should set it up. So it was an evolution, and it probably took a couple of months of weekly meetings and me just writing. They just said, just write, to really get a sense of what this was going to end up looking like in the end. So it's a
Yeah.
little bit different than a traditional book, right? You've had a chance to read some of it.
Yeah.
It's not a story from start to finish. It's many stories, and many of them speak back to each other. And I do reference other stories, like as you read along in the book, I'll reference other chapters where I wrote about something just to make a point again. But it's a series of stories, and it follows the GRACE model, which GRACE, as we know, is an acronym for the pillars that guided my journey over the last 15 years to getting to where I
Yeah.
am today.
And one thing too, I love that you said that GRACE is an acronym, because I think it's so beautifully laid out. And I feel like where like a lot of the things that I'd love to dive into are going to feel like so focused on like that first gratitude pillar that you have, and then
It's
those
it's it's the
are going to
holy
be able
grail.
to
It's it.
right.
It's the beacon. It's it. It's the starting and the end point.
Yeah. But one thing that is very beautiful and unique is that you also have your daughters that contributed into this book as
Yeah,
well. And
I
what
did.
what was it like for them? I know, I mean, they can speak for themselves obviously, but what was it like for them? Like what was it like to have this together and do this together?
Well, they each went away with they. So what I asked them, and I really wasn't sure how they would receive it. Again, this was another interesting direction from my editor. He said, it might be interesting to have other people's stories layered in here if you feel that they have some value, to really add to these pillars, to just give them a little bit more, another perspective. And he said, would your daughters like to write in the book? And initially, my initial thought was probably not. But I thought, well, all you can do is ask. And they said, sure. And I said, really? And they said, what do you want us to write? I said, I want you to write whatever you want to write, just as long as it fits into one of those pillars, and you choose whichever one you want to write about. And so they each respectively chose something different. They went away and just did their own thing. And their chapters are so uniquely individual, and they very much reflect each of my daughters' personalities, and also the stories that they wanted to share. One is lighthearted, one is much more sweet and meaningful and poignant, and one is a little painful, both for my daughter to write and for me to read. But it's the truth, and it's part of our journey. And I'm so proud of all of my girls for finding their voices and sharing them authentically.
I got full chills just at that moment of them saying we'd love to. It's like you never
Yeah,
know how they're going to receive it, and you never into the surprise that comes with that too. And it's just I think so beautiful to also I don't know exactly how old they are, but to also just be able to be given this opportunity is kind of like I guess what we were talking about a little bit of like speaker slam, having that opportunity. It's like this
yeah,
liberating moment where you can be on stage and be in your fullest expression regardless of what the outcome is, but to give them that space and that platform is just something that just instills this like beautiful like confidence and opportunity of expression. And that I feel like is something just as humans that we're all searching for ways that we can be fully expressed and
yeah.
be our authentic selves. And I feel like what a beautiful way as you as a mother to give this to your daughters is just beautiful, like so
Thank you.
incredible.
Thank you. And it's as much a gift to me because I always knew they were good writers. I knew that they were capable of putting something wonderful together, but I was astounded in the nicest way, like the most beautiful way possible at what they wrote and how articulate they were and how they were just such good storytellers. Yeah, I am just really grateful. It's such a thrill to be able to have them included, and now they can call themselves authors too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just a beautiful testament to like, of course, like your husband and just it
Yeah,
being all of you doing this together is just so beautiful. One of the things that I really loved from like the get-go and the opening of the book is the piece around, and there's so much in this, but I'm curious if you want to just like maybe unpack a little bit or of it. But basically, it's this piece around, and you were speaking, you were in conversation with another man that you had met, I believe at the airport. It, correct me if I'm wrong, but he said, sometimes we have to leave the things we don't understand to the randomness of the universe. And I know that's so loaded, but I'd love for you to just kind of maybe share some context, share what you've kind of gathered from.
yeah. That was such a beautiful conversation. Yeah, we didn't meet at the airport, but you are correct in that there was an airport involved in his story. He had lost his wife very unexpectedly while they were in transit, traveling actually across the world to New Zealand. She died in flight, and my husband had died also very unexpectedly. And we were right around the same time. I think we were about a year apart in our journeys, and both of us quite a ways into our journeys now. Both of us more than a decade in. So, when we were sitting down having this conversation, we were both able to speak to it from a place of context and perspective, and then having evolved through all of our emotions and all the pieces that we didn't understand in the early days. But I remember saying, how did you deal with it, because it was such a tragic loss. He said, I sat down with my brother-in-law, who's a philosopher, to ask him if he could give me some context or some perspective, and he said, sometimes the things we don't understand, we just have to leave to the randomness of the universe. And when this gentleman shared this with me, I thought, in my mind right away, that meant that's just another way of saying that we have no control over when someone's time is over, and when it's over, it's over. And so I said to him, when he shared that with me, I said, do you believe that when it's someone's time, it's their time? He said, I do. I said, I do too. And I think the circumstances are irrelevant. It doesn't matter where they were and what the situation was. And that's a tough one for some people to wrap their heads around. I understand that, especially when it's something that's very tragic, like an accident or something. But I do believe that we all have a finite amount of time. I say this in my book repeatedly, I think. I believe we're all spirits having a human experience, and we have a job to do here. And that job is predetermined when we arrive in this lifetime. So I don't know this man's wife, his late wife, but I certainly know I can speak from my own experience with my husband. He had such an impact on so many people at such a young age. And my daughters refer to this, and one of them, at least in their chapters, they say, in his 49 years, he probably covered off and did more and made more impact than most people would do in twice that lifetime. He was just that person. So it almost makes not sense, but it makes it a little easier to wrap my head around. He did his job. He did what he set out to do. And every person's life that he came across, he touched in some special way. And so his work was done.
Yeah.
And the girls were youngish when their dad died. They're all now in their 20s. But, initially, you can look at it from the point of view, I wish they'd had more time with him. But then I think, look at how much time they had with him and the influence he had. And when I look at something like these chapters that they just pulled together for this book, it's very clear the influence that he had on them.
Yeah.
Just the way they're able to articulate, the way they're able to find context, the maturity, just the perspective they're able to find. A lot of that is his influence for sure.
Yeah. It makes me think about my family and I, we lost my cousin, and he was 20. And I think about exactly what you just said. And I say this constantly. I talk about him a lot. I talk about his journey a lot, his story a lot, because in 20 years, the impact and that he has left in this world, and that legacy continues. Now we're almost approaching kind of this interesting, next year will actually be 20 years since he passed. So it's a very like just interesting dynamic, and yet it feels like, you know what I mean? Like just that essence and that legacy. And I think that's something that we can pull into simply just like the everyday lives. Because I think sometimes when we talk about legacy, that feels so big, almost can feel like so far out of reach, but it's in the little tiny moments, those little pieces of kindness, of service, of joy, of all of that is what contributes to our legacy. It's not this grandiose moment where it just all of a sudden, here's my legacy. And I think sometimes we like miss the point in that. We like are working so hard and we forget about the little pieces that we can contribute to contributing to our legacy.
Yeah. Oh, so well said. So well said. So true. Right. And I think one of the things that we can do that contributes to our legacy that is universal to everybody and we all have access to it is kindness. I always think if there's, if you have the opportunity to be anything at all in this lifetime and in this world and in your day-to-day interactions, it's to be kind because that doesn't get missed and that speaks volumes to who you are as a person and how settled you are, you know, within yourself if you can give that back.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's something that truly takes no effort. Like it just
Mm-hmm.
it can be the simplest little thing that you can do no matter where you are that you have no we have no idea what other people are going through and you never know what other people need in that moment. You know, something can feel so tiny and minuscule to you, but it could be something so huge for someone else in their life. You talk a lot about and kind of specifically the first chapter of gratitude. You talk about how the antidote to hardship is and pain is gratitude. And I'm curious, how did you find that gratitude in your grief?
It found me. It found me immediately. And that's how I knew that there was something bigger at work in my life. I was always, a believer. I'm a believer in God. I was raised Catholic. I went to church and all of that growing up. But in those early moments, when I got a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning that my husband passed away because he was traveling, he was on business in China. So he was halfway across the world when he died. And when I got that phone call, my pragmatic side said, well, I'm not going to share the news with anybody now. It's the middle of the night. I just need to sit with this. And so my immediate instinct was just to crawl over to his side of the bed and wrap myself up in the sheets. And I could feel his essence, not just around me because of the sheets, but I could feel his energy in our room. And this movie reel of memories started playing in my mind from our earliest days as a young couple when we were first married and the excitement that we had at building a new life, which you're in that stage of your life now, which is so exciting. And then the memories that we did create, with our children that we brought into the world and all of the, wonderful memories, travels, all the things we did together as a family. And I was so grateful, Ashley. And I thought, okay, wait. I was so real to the fact that I was going through this devastating news. I wasn't in shock. But there was also this other moment that was happening for me where his energy was everywhere. And I just felt his love. And I was so grateful. These memories, I knew that was him just throwing them at me, like remember all the good. And I was so grateful. And right in that moment, I said, okay, there's something bigger at work in your life here. Like you're surrounded, girl, by a team of angels right now. And that became the guiding light for me. That became that thing that I really grasped onto and said, okay, I want to covet this. This is something that, and there was a history prior to my husband passing where I was going through all this restlessness. And I know now, I didn't really understand what it was back then, but now I know that it was my spirit calling me to wake up. And often it does take something tragic to wake you up. But I'm so grateful that it woke me up immediately. And that became this thing this next relationship that I really wanted to work on developing. And it wasn't fluid and it wasn't linear and it wasn't all good. There was highs and lows. And I think sometimes when we go through the lows, we also have to say, okay, what's missing for me? What's going on here that's not being fulfilled? So it's a quest. It's a quest and it's a journey, but gratitude has always been, it was the impetus for me for moving forward. And it's the thing that I've always, my daughter, my youngest daughter writes about it in a really sweet way, in a very simple way. She was quite young when her dad died and somebody asked her early on, how are you doing? And she said, well, why would I be sad? Papa gave me so many reasons to be happy. And we all
Yeah.
just went, wait a second. But she had this great perspective, and when she writes about it in her chapter, she said, was I wholeheartedly happy? Of course not. But she said, I knew it was within my power to find things to be grateful for, and he gave me so many things to be grateful for. So she already had this mindset as at the tender age of 11 to understand that it was completely within her power to find gratitude. It's this word that people think is so overdone, overused. Oh yeah, gratitude. It's probably one of the most powerful things you can tap into, and it's there for all of us. And
Yeah.
it's curious. I'm doing a presentation in about 2 weeks from now at Camp Widow, which is it's a conference that's run for widows. I've done it a few times over the last few years, and I'm presenting on finding grace. And I know that, I can't spend enough time on gratitude. I wish I could do the whole presentation on gratitude, because it
Right?
really is that, it is that jump off point, but it's also that sustaining point. It's that thing that if you just keep practicing gratitude, you'll see that it can coexist with grief. They both embody our heart, right? Grief shows us that our humanity, just, when we feel the depth of that sadness, but gratitude connects us to that place where there's nothing but pure happiness and peace. So they can coexist. And one day you'll find, as you practice gratitude more and more, that, it will overtake the grief. So anyway, I can't stress it enough, but everybody has to go through it in their own way and in their own time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love
Yeah.
gratitude.
And I'm curious, how was that with you having this like perspective, or just being able to almost tap into that grief or tap into the gratitude almost immediately and just be able to like experience all that love and that gratitude for that love, and also honor, of course there's going to be sadness of it, because I think it's really there's that physicality of like the physicalness that we can't have them with us.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm curious, was that ever received, did anyone else like on the outside struggle with that around you?
No, no, because I felt the gratitude immediately. And that became this thing where I'm like, okay, I really want to covet this relationship. But that by no means, certainly not in the beginning, and not for the first many, many months, by no means did that overshadow my grief. I mean, my grief was deep. It was deep, and it was dark, and it was desolate, and I was horribly sad. But I also knew that I had access to his energy anytime. I just said to myself, just talk to him. I know he's listening. I know he's here. I know. And, they can't answer you. It's funny because when you're in the depths of that grief, you don't necessarily hear it. You don't see the signs. And as you start to ease into your life, and you just sort of settle into who you are, and start making your peace and finding your way, then you start to see the signs. They're all over the place. And I still get them now. I still get them now. And they're fun. They're jokes, right? I don't even finish a thought in my mind before I hear an answer. And I'm like, yeah, okay.
I feel that too. And that's why I think too, I can't remember it now at this moment. I think I was probably 13 when my cousin passed, which was like that first experience with grief, and just of course being at this age of just not being able to really like comprehend, like I'm not going to see this person ever again. Like it's such a strange concept.
Finality of it
Now
all.
it
Yeah.
feels, yeah, now it's very different. But I think that's what I've always tapped through, because it was my first experience with grief and with death. And yet I've experienced so many losses over the years. But him and my grandmother were two very like, prominent ones in my life. And yet I find myself even on, for example, like anniversaries, like this past couple weeks ago was the 10-year anniversary of my grandmother. And it's like I don't even tap into the sadness, because there is so much gratitude. There's so much gratitude for simply knowing this person, but also has been this bond that continues to live on and continues to just be. It's there. And yes, like you said, we don't hear the response physically, and we're not having that like direct dialogue, but when we pay attention, we can really notice where all the signs are, where how they're always around this. And I always visually feel like I have, like you said it, the team of angels. And I feel like that with all the people that I've lost in my life too. And it's like, how do I can't even tap into that sadness or that same feeling of grief anymore. It's, sometimes now it's more so like, talking about starting a family. And I'm like, oh, I just wish, the children that I have got to like really experience their energy, but they will through me and through the
100%.
stories that I
Just going to
share,
say that. Exactly. Exactly. And that's exactly what it is. And, I was reading something today about, the stages of grief they say that you go through when you lose someone. And I think that was something that was more established and developed for the dying versus the people who are left behind, when someone does die. But nevertheless, there's these stages. And the last one they say is acceptance. And acceptance doesn't necessarily mean that you've let go and completely moved on. It just means that you've kind of interwoven what you've learned through the whole journey and carried it forward with you. So as you say, it's how you show up. And I was just reading something that I had written not too long ago. It was while I was in the process of writing the book, and thinking about how I have taken so much of Mike's essence and embodied into my life, into how I show up. And I can say I'm a much kinder, wiser, more compassionate, softer, more patient person than I was before, for sure. Because I consciously wanted to adapt a lot of his parenting style and his just characteristics. But, and having been married for 20 years and together for 25, that it came kind of easily. I just had to make a concerted effort saying, yeah, you know who this person is. Like they are a part of you for that long. So you can carry that forward, and it's respecting, and that's keeping their legacy alive too, right?
Yeah.
So and as you say, I love what you just said about when you do have your own family, those people that are no longer physically in your life will come through in the way you come through and show up.
Yeah. And
And
it's so
that's how we
beautiful.
honor them and carry them forward.
Exactly. And you talk a lot too about the book. It's not just about you losing your husband. You also talk about you losing your dad. And I'm curious too, because I mean, I've experienced the loss of you see someone sick and you have that space and time to say goodbye. And I've experienced the very sudden, it just happens, and there's not really any preparation or just any opportunity for you to be able to say goodbye. And I'm curious, how did you navigate? How were they different? How did they feel different? But also to just the how are you able to find peace? Being able to say goodbye to your dad and then not technically with your husband, how are you still able to find that same peace?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it would be a tough question if I felt that there were things left unsaid with my husband, but I didn't. So with my dad, he was given a very terminal diagnosis. And so we knew that we have a finite amount of time with him. And that became the priority, to just spend as much time as we could with him. When I say we, my sisters and myself, we were all married and left the home already, but we all lived fortunately quite close to each other. So I made a point of seeing my dad pretty much every single day that I could. And we just said everything we need to say. And it was interesting with my dad because he had brain cancer, and the part of his brain that was affected his speech. So it'd be very challenging to have something that might take you and I 2 minutes to share might take him 20 minutes. And you could see that he was, the words here, but it just is not making the connection to the mouth, right? And I would just say to him, I'm not going anywhere, Dad. So take all the time you need. And if you can't get it out, don't worry. Like, I kind of already know what he's trying to say. And it didn't matter. I just wanted to give him the dignity. And more than anything, I just wanted to spend the time and hold his hand. But, in that space of the year, we got to do and say everything we wanted to. And it felt like there was nothing left unspoken. It was really a very satisfying year, as sad as it was. And then with my husband, yes, he died very unexpectedly. However, ours was a relationship that was really rooted in communication from the get-go. And so when there, and because he traveled for most of our married life, we really valued our time together, and we would carve out those moments. And I do write about this in the book, where we would just set aside time for ourselves. Even when the kids were small, we put a movie on for them and say, Mom and Dad are talking right now. Unless you're on fire, this is our time. So we made it really clear that we valued our time together too. And we would carve out those moments for each other. So the communication was something that was always present in our relationship. And therefore, when he did die, I mean, obviously there's so much more I would have loved to have said, but there was nothing that was left unsaid.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful thing, and I think that's
And
yeah,
that's a
just the
regret a
piece.
lot of people have, Ashley. Like that, I've heard that so
Yeah,
many times when I do a lot of work in in the grief and bereavement community, and that's something I hear a lot. I've facilitated a lot of groups over the years, and I've heard people say, like, I just wish I'd had a chance to say this, or I regret that we didn't have the best marriage at the end, or this or that or the other thing. And again, what I've gone through, everybody has to go through at some point in their lives. It's a sad reality of life. You hope it doesn't happen suddenly and when you're in the kind of prime of your life, but I feel so blessed on so many levels. And I think that's the one thing that people are astounded with when I say this, when I think about my experience. I'm really, really blessed. I don't know what it's like to have hardship in a marriage. I know what it's like to have strong communication and deep love for somebody. And yes, I know the pain of losing them overnight, but I had such a great experience with that person that I feel I'm not lacking for anything,
what comes
except
through
for
is just
time,
like
except for time.
exactly, except for time, but what comes through is just rooted in love is what it feels like the essence of just your marriage and your partnership with your husband is just rooted in love. And that doesn't mean that there aren't those difficult conversations or those difficult moments, but it's the choice that we have to to just not let them simmer or not let them be prolonged because they don't have to be, you know? And I think sometimes that is where us as humans make things a lot more complicated than they need to be, is, you know, letting things just like stick for too long and stay for too long and not saying the things that we want to say. And I think where loss comes in, unfortunately, like you said before too, it becomes, unfortunately, is like, can be a wake up for us at times, but it's the thing that sometimes teaches us to not go without saying the things you have to say, and just allowing, like really pushing ourselves to say everything, to not like not let things fester, not let things go on more than they need to. And that's like, I feel like the hard part, and to be honest, this is like a hard reality that I'm hearing for myself in this moment too.
Yeah, for sure. But that's a great thing. Sometimes as we hear ourselves speaking, about, or we're having that conversation with somebody, we just all of a sudden we say, "Oh God, that's me. Like I could do better at that
Yeah.
too." And to be honest with you, it's interesting because I write about this in the book as well. That was something that we demonstrated for our daughters. The valuing the relationship, communicating, and that's something that I have with my daughters now too. But it took work, right? They were, because it was, I struggled. I definitely had, it was not a linear journey, for many reasons. And so, there were moments in throughout, over the years where there was tension in the house for sure. But we
Yeah.
always came back to, okay, there was usually one person who was the spokesperson of the three girls, but they're all very strong communicators. And, we would sit down and have those hard conversations. And a lot of times, Ashley, I was on the receiving end of those hard conversations, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
And I knew where it was coming from. I looked at them and I thought, my gosh, here are these little people who are not little people, but who are literally modeling their father's behavior. And they're sitting down with me and they're having a very grown up conversation in a very grown up way. And it's not an attack, it's coming from a place of love and wanting better for me. So, how could I not respect that and honor them and give them that voice, right? And so that's,
Yeah.
and I mean, thank goodness I can say now, and that's why the book I think is came now versus 10 or 12 or 15 years ago when I had the idea. First of all, I hadn't gone through all of these things, but the book came now at the right time, and it came to life, I guess, as easily as it did, or as seamlessly, maybe. Just, great team of people working around me too. But I was ready. I was ready to write all the stories and share them, because I also feel like we're very much in a place, and let's face it, my daughters are the people that whose opinions matter the most to me, who I want to be most accountable to. And so I think we're in a place where we're really healthy. We're four grown women. So whenever somebody is going through something now, that's the way I approach it. I'm like, we are four grown women. We're not mom daughters anymore. I'll always be your mom if you need me in that way, but we're just four grown women, and that's the way we treat each other. So
I have to
it
say
was a
too,
nice time to write.
I have to say too, like just this celebration of you as a mother on that end, because I think sometimes, or not, I don't want to say sometimes, but generational, there's been this dynamic of, you know, I'm the mother and you're the child, you know, I'm the parent, you're the child. And yeah, just this like humility, I guess maybe that's the word that's coming through, to be able to be open to receiving. And I think that's where we build these beautiful connections and relationships with each other, with our children, is when we can be on the receiving end and allow ourselves to, or give them the space to communicate. You know, we all, every single human being, regardless of mother, father, son, daughter, it doesn't even matter. We all want to be seen and heard. That is a need,
Absolutely.
a core need of every single human that walks this earth. And we have to give each other that same respect and same opportunity and same love. And that's, I think, the core. And so I think it's just, I really wanted to underline, acknowledge that piece of you, just like that humility of just being able to receive, like in that moment of them coming to you when the hard conversations needed, and receiving, because it's such a beautiful dynamic to create in a relationship, like all these foundational elements that we don't get taught in
You're right.
school, and it's like in the home is
Yeah.
where we learn these things.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And you hit on it, you touched upon a really important point about, I think, generationally too. Because we all pick up things from, who came before us, what we learned. And I can say as a young mom, I very much parented the way my mom parented me. And that was, very strict and, very to the letter, and there's rules and, so on and so forth. And it wasn't all bad. I wasn't horrible, and I had the support of my husband. So I know it wasn't all bad because he's like, but these are the rules, these are the rules. And he was totally on the same page as me. But, certainly, like I said, loosening up for many reasons, wanting to embody more of his way with my daughters, but then also as they grew into themselves, respecting the fact that they are grown young people now, and now they're women, and looking at us as all equals. And I think generationally, that's something newer to our generation than came before us, So I really love the fact that I truly can say I look at my daughters as we're equal, and I have so much respect for them.
Yeah, so much power in all of that. I'd love for you to share a little bit of we talked a lot about like the piece of grace that's all about gratitude, but even just to shed some light on all the other different pieces. And I feel like, yeah, I'd love for you to share a little bit of what the other elements and pieces of the pillars to this are.
I'd love to. Thank you. So, how we came up with this idea of grace is initially, as I said to you, when I was writing these stories, and my style of writing, and they're sort of short stories. My editor said, why don't we come up with like 50 stories, and some will speak to others, but they don't have to be like a start of your life to the end of your life. They can just all kind of interweave, and that's, as that's how the book unfolds. And we had this idea of maybe calling it 50 paths to something. And of course, I kept alluding to in the beginning, finding gratitude helped me to find my peace. It was all about finding my inner peace. And that was the missing piece for me, that restlessness that I'd had before that I didn't know what that was. So we were thinking, 50 paths to inner peace, or 50 paths to discovering your essence, or whatever. It was 50 paths to something. And we thought, okay, we'll break it up. And you said, well, what are sort of the guiding pillars for you? And so it was gratitude. And then I came up with them, resilience. And as my connections one, evolving or being empowered or whatever. And all of a sudden grace just popped up. As I wrote the book with this idea of 50 paths to something in 50 chapters, I knew grace had to be in the subtitle somewhere in the title, because that was what guided my journey. And I was sitting over dinner one evening with my daughters, and it was my youngest daughter. She said, well, why not Hello Grace? And I said, why not Hello Grace? So I was like, and it was funny because as we were going through all these 50 paths to this and whatever, I kept saying to my team, my publishing team, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I'll land on it. Like when we land on it, I'll know. And as soon as it left her lips, I went, oh my gosh. And I'm on I'm wanting to pee myself, Ashley, because I was so excited on my next team call with my publishing team. And like, they're all on the call. And I'm like, I'm just waiting to tell them, I'm like, I've got the title. And anyway, we went back and forth. They loved it too, but they really felt that I needed to say what Grace stood for, because they're like, Grace might be a character. Like, we don't know who Grace is. Who's Grace? And I said, that's okay, because you're going to turn around and read the back, and you're going to find out what Grace means. And that's what everybody does. Let's face it. They pick up a book and then they read the back to see if they want to buy it. So I was thank you for calling out the styling, because I remember saying I was so clear about wanting the simplicity, and I didn't want any descriptions, any subtitles on the cover. And I said to my publisher, I said, I will probably be as picky about the design of the cover as I have been about every word that's been on inside of this book.
Yeah.
So I just had the vision and I knew what I wanted it to be. So anyway, so back to your question. So for me, the things that really stood up, and I can even go back now and think I could have used so many other letters or words
Yeah.
for the letters, but resilience is the R in grace. And whether you go through a grief journey or whatever, just navigating life and coming out the other side of hardship, you cultivate resilience. It's not something you're born with. It's taking those knocks. It's getting yourself, picking yourself back up again. And we have, kind of jokes. It was something that, my kid's dad, my late husband, used to say about, the knocks he took in business as a young man, and, having to dust himself off. And there was this song by a band called Chumbawamba, or Tub Thumping by Chumbawamba. And it's all about, I get knocked down and I get up again. And he used to sing that on the sidelines of the kids' soccer games and like, just come on, get up again. And so that was his theme song. And so resilience was just like such an obvious thing to write about. And it's something that people love to talk about, like to understand more how they can become more resilient. People think you are, or you're not born that way. Those behaviors are modeled for you through, parenting examples, through life examples. And it's something that we all cultivate. So resilience was an important one to talk about. And then the A was going to be, could be acceptance. It could be awareness. It could be a lot of things, but I thought awareness was really important. And you've shone that so many times through this conversation today when you're just reflecting on yourself. Like, you have so much awareness. And it's something that I think you see probably in the people that you meet. You can tell right away when people do have self-awareness, and they don't, in terms of how they conduct themselves, how they show up with other people. Kindness, is a huge example of having awareness for things around you outside of yourself. So that was something I wanted to write about. And I wanted to also touch on awareness, not only from the point of view of self-awareness, but aware of how other people see you too. And not in the sense that, oh, I have to be a certain way because people, I want people to see me a certain way. It's like, how do my actions affect other people, right? So being aware of how other people receive me too. So I thought awareness was, and so I talk about both in that section of the book. Connection to me is right up there with gratitude. Like those two things are the fundamental pillars in living a fulfilling life. Because let's face it, next to food, water, and shelter, connection is the most fundamental of our
Yeah.
human needs. We can't survive without it. So that was something, but I also want to talk about connection, not just with other people, but connection to something you can't see, as I talk about a lot in the book, or whether it's just to the things that bring you peace. Nature's a huge one. Like there's so many ways that we can connect to life. So connection is the C, and then E is evolution. It's how we grow through what we go through.
It's so powerful. I'm so excited to I'm like I said, I'm so excited to have the physical copy and be able to like read this. And it's so beautiful. This might feel I had this conversation recently, and a lot of what you were sharing is things that I've also written even in my first book, and it's called The Key to Happiness. And I did the exact same thing where I was like, these are these like five fundamental like key principles of happiness. And I talk about gratitude, I talk about awareness. And I think what's beautiful is, we all have this beautiful ability to like tap into source. And I know this might sound a little weird, but my friend shared this with me. And whether that's like God, whatever it is that you believe in, but we can all have this ability to tap into source. And this is why I'm such a big believer in like even the work that I do with helping people write their books as well. It's like there's so many, yes, there's going to be so many books about similar topics, and yet we need more. We need
Yeah,
more because we need more
I agree.
perspectives. We
Yes.
need more of this into the world because we're all tapping into source, and this is where it's all coming from. And it is such a beautiful gift to us, humanity, to not only be the person who writes it, because as probably you've experienced now, writing a book is such a magical transformational journey for yourself and also then the people that get to read it. It is this dual side to it that we get to
Yes.
experience and that we get to bring and
Yeah.
offer into the world. And I just think it's so powerful and magical. And I'm so happy that, I've been able to connect with you and be able to read your words and read your perspective. And I think those that have really gone through probably a lot of like grief and loss are going to connect more so with the journey and the story. But there's so much to be taken from your words and your daughter's words as well. It's
Thank
so
you.
magical, and I'm so grateful to you for saying yes to the hard thing.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, and I think, I know this is a great place probably just to like wrap this up, but I want to reiterate what you just said, because I do remember having that experience when I wrote in the anthology book, and that book was called Ignite Your Inner Spirit. So everybody was talking about stories where they had, really some connection to like something, a wake up, right? So of course, right away there's this kinship amongst all the authors because we're all like, yeah, we've all got a wake up
Yeah.
kind of story to share. But I remember thinking exactly what you just said. The more people out here sharing stories like this, the better. It's not one of those situations where I'm writing about a car brand model that like there's competition out there. Like, we're all speaking from the same place of wanting better for humanity. And I think the more stories we get out there like that, the better. And we love soaking in other people's stories when we read about them because we see so many alignments, in our own journeys, right? And what we experience, we just go, yes, yes, yes.
There's so much that we take from stories, and story is something that I've just tapped into recently. It's like the oldest medicine. If we think far, 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 far back, our ancestors what were they doing? They were sitting around fire and sharing stories. It is the oldest medicine for us, and that's how we, like you said, like it's a mirror for us. It can be a mirror for us to see ourselves through story and also receive through hearing other people's stories and their journeys, and being able to, being guided and receiving that support is so beautiful. And that's why, for anyone who's tuned in and listened to this, if this I'm speaking to the person who probably feels like they want to write a book one day. My goodness, there is going to be no better time. Yes, you kind of talked about this earlier, but yes, there's going to be that period of time where it's going to it's going to go through that kind of like incubation and gestation of it. And you kind of have to like let it simmer, let it unfold. And then there's going to be the moment where
You'll
you know
know.
you're going to be ready for it.
Yeah.
And that's the moment to not be afraid.
Yeah. Amen.
Amen. So, those that are tuning in, if I know we talked so much about your beautiful book, if you want a copy, hellograce.ca. I'll also leave the link down to the website down below as well for those that are tuning in. And if there's just anything that you receive from purchasing the book, and feel free to connect with Lydia. Thank you for listening. Make sure to leave a review and continue the conversation with me over on social media. And we'll see you in the next episode.